Tonight, new signs they may be open to negotiations with the White House. Beijing says it's evaluating possible trade talks after senior U.S. officials reached out through relevant parties multiple times.
What if I told you that the fates of two superpowers, nations seemingly destined to clash, are inextricably linked? That the future of the global economy, the balance of power, and even the very definition of democracy itself hangs on a relationship forged in ambition, tempered by conflict, and strained by suspicion. This is the story of China and the United States. A story where a handshake can change the world, and a single misstep could unleash chaos. Are we heading for a new Cold War? Or are we already there? The story begins not with grand strategy, but with simple commerce. In 1784, the Empress of China set sail, laden with silver, toward the shores of Canton. The lure, silk, tea, porcelain, the treasures of the East, highly prized in the burgeoning United States. This early trade was largely one-sided. China, under the Qing dynasty, viewed foreign merchants with suspicion and imposed strict regulations. The U.S., eager to establish itself on the world stage, navigated these restrictions, but the seeds of future conflict were already being sown, particularly with the rise of the opium trade. The Opium Wars of the mid-19th century dramatically shifted the power dynamic. Western powers, including Great Britain, forced China to open its markets and cede territory. While the U.S. wasn't directly involved in the wars, it benefited from the unequal treaties that followed, gaining access to Chinese ports and markets. Meanwhile, in the American West, Chinese laborers played a crucial role in building the Transcontinental Railroad. They faced discrimination and hardship, yet their contributions were undeniable. However, this period also marked the beginning of anti-Chinese sentiment in the U.S., culminating in the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, a blatant act of discrimination that severely restricted Chinese immigration. The turn of the century saw China in turmoil. The Boxer Rebellion, an anti-foreign uprising, was brutally suppressed by a coalition of Western powers, including the United States. In response, the U.S. advocated for the open door policy, aiming to maintain equal access to Chinese markets for all nations. This policy, while seemingly benign, was also intended to prevent any single power from dominating China. The Second World War forged an unlikely alliance between the U.S. and China. The U.S. provided support to Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government in its fight against Japanese aggression. The Flying Tigers, a group of American volunteer pilots, became heroes in China. However, even amidst the shared struggle against Japan, the seeds of future division were being sown. The Chinese Civil War between Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists and Mao Zedong's communists raged on. The U.S. supported the nationalists, but their efforts proved insufficient. In 1949, the communists emerged victorious, establishing the People's Republic of China. The U.S. refused to recognize the new government and continued to support the nationalists on Taiwan. The Korean War, which erupted in 1950, became a proxy conflict between the U.S. and China, solidifying the Cold War divide. For the next 2 decades, the U.S. pursued a policy of containment, seeking to isolate China diplomatically and economically. The two nations engaged in a fierce ideological struggle, vying for influence in the developing world. In a stunning reversal of policy, President Richard Nixon traveled to China in 1972, meeting with Chairman Mao Zedong. This historic visit, orchestrated by Henry Kissinger, marked a turning point in relations, paving the way for normalization. The Shanghai Communique, signed during the visit, acknowledged the One China policy, a crucial step toward reconciliation. Following Nixon's visit, cultural exchange programs flourished, and trade began to increase. The U.S. recognized the People's Republic of China in 1979, formally ending its diplomatic relations with Taiwan. The Tiananmen Square protests of 1989 cast a shadow over the improving relationship. The brutal crackdown on pro-democracy demonstrators led to international condemnation and a temporary cooling of relations. Despite the setback of Tiananmen Square, China's economic reforms continued apace. The country embraced market capitalism, becoming a manufacturing powerhouse and a major exporter. China's accession to the World Trade Organization in 2001 further integrated it into the global economy. The economic relationship between the U.S. and China became so intertwined that some coined the term Chimerica. The U.S. benefited from cheap Chinese goods, while China accumulated vast reserves of U.S. dollars. However, this interdependence also created vulnerabilities, as each nation became reliant on the other. The U.S. began to worry about its growing trade deficit with China and the potential for unfair trade practices. In the 21st century, the relationship between the U.S. and China has become increasingly strained. China's growing military power, particularly in the South China Sea, has raised concerns in the U.S. and its allies. The two nations are engaged in a geopolitical competition for influence in Asia and beyond. The Trump administration initiated a trade war with China, imposing tariffs on billions of dollars worth of goods. The conflict has extended to the technological realm, with the U.S. restricting Chinese companies like Huawei and TikTok, citing national security concerns. Human rights issues, particularly the treatment of Uyghurs in Xinjiang and the erosion of democracy in Hong Kong, remain a major point of contention between the U.S. and China. The two nations also have fundamentally different political systems and ideologies, which fuel suspicion and mistrust. The relationship between China and the United States is at a critical juncture. The two nations face a choice: to manage their differences and find areas of cooperation, or to succumb to rivalry and conflict. The stakes are high, not just for the US and China, but for the entire world. Can these two titans navigate this complex relationship without stumbling into a new Cold War? Or something far worse? The future remains uncertain.